All right, guys. So we're back. Sorry I didn't get that extra video in last week. I was very sick. Some of you already know. I've talked to some of you. But I'm doing much better now, so that's good. But in any case, welcome to another Pickled Dragon Unscripted. I got 80, 90 questions from you guys that I have to plug through. So I'm gonna try to get through a few of those today. I did start a new project, and I know this is probably nothing new to anyone, but I've got dozens of these old modules from the first and second edition, um, the old uh, Dungeon Master screen, and so forth. But they've all just been sitting in boxes this whole time. So I thought to try to preserve them, I would go ahead and wrap them up like you would a comic book. So bag and board and all that stuff. It's probably nothing new to you guys, but it's going to take me a while to get through them all. So I've just gotten started. But in the process of going through my modules, I found a little special treat here. At the GaryCon 9 or 10, I can't remember which one, I met Darlene, who you guys should know is the artist who created the Greyhawk map. So she was very kind enough to get me this print and sign to Matt, Darlene. Very, very dramatic there, but I love it. But I'm going to go ahead and get it framed. I've got a ton of art that needs to be framed. It's just kind of a backlog. So that was kind of cool. I found that stuff. In any case, on with the questions. I had a question, and it's actually a good one. I shouldn't say actually, because you guys give a lot of good questions, but one of our giveaway winners asked the question about how to play D&D solo. Now, when you first think about it, you think, well, yeah, I mean, I could set up a board, have miniatures, have my orcs to kill, and roll some dice. But when you think about it, that's not really a role-playing game then. It just becomes kind of a miniatures dice game. So I did some thinking, and then I remembered something that I had the Catacombs books. Now, I think this is first edition, but it's taken the kind of your choose your own adventure style of writing, and you kind of step through it by yourself. It tells you when you get to roll dice, but it's got a very rich story in here. I think this was my favorite one. Night of the Living Dead. You're a paladin who wakes up just with this horrible stench in his nose, and you realize the stench is your grave. You've been animated. You're dead. And you've got to find out, how did this happen? And how do you undo this? So it's a very cool story, but it's very choose your own adventure. You hit a certain point, and it'll tell you go to 22A, and you go to 22A, and it gives you you read the section, and if you have to roll dice, you have to roll dice. Otherwise, if you want to, you're free to, like here in this chapter, you're free to investigate the room. If you search the desk and stool, go to 138C. If you look at the book on the desk, you go to 122C. So it's a very, very rich and very cool book. I think there are 5 or 6 other ones. I don't know how good they are. I know that there was one that was a comedy. It's called something like Gnomes 100, Dragons 0. Basically, you play a gnome who is trying to save his people from dragons. But I think it's comedic. But I think it's kind of like Dragonlance style. And then there's some other ones. I don't know how good they are, but this allows you to um, play and roll dice, be a solo gamer. So I think that's pretty cool. And I got to thinking, the old school choose your own adventure books. Those were. Um, I wonder if those could be adapted to the same similar style. But if you wanted to introduce story into your solo play, which I think that's the heart of a role playing game is the story. So um, I hope that answers the question. It's kind of a interesting topic. How would you manage playing D&D by yourself? Of course, the flip side of that, and maybe by solo play, maybe they mean one DM, one player, you know, and that, looking back, when I think back to gaming, when I was like in junior high, there were times I had only one player, and they would play more than one character, or sometimes they would only play one character. It just depended on what they wanted to do. I always found it interesting when they only played one character. Um, then you could introduce NPCs, and you remove that element of ultimate cooperation between all these characters. If they're NPCs, there could be some dialogue between them. So, but in any case, yeah, I think it's a good question. How to play D&D yourself? I wouldn't mind seeing more stuff like this. I think this was really cool. And again, I can't speak to how good the other books were. I can't remember, but I know that this one was a lot of fun. So I think the PDF for Night of the Living Dead, that's Night with a K. I think the PDF for that is available. So if you ever want to give that a shot. So another question here. On the topic of miniatures, I have a backlog of unpainted minis, and I find it a hard time motivating myself to sit and paint. I enjoy it, but the time cost can be a detriment. So, what do you do to motivate yourself to paint, do DM prep, and write for your game? Well, sadly, I don't get to paint miniatures anymore. I just don't have the time. But when I did paint miniatures, I set aside a day. I said, this day is for painting miniatures. And I just did it. I'd sit down and I would just start painting. That's it. It's a matter of scheduling yourself, scheduling or setting aside your time and just doing it. A lot of times people say, I sit down, I can't think of what to write. And sometimes you start with the middle. It's sometimes starting, writing is just a matter of if you can just get started, you're in good shape. So in terms of finding time to write, sometimes it's the opening paragraph or initial uh, entry into your adventure that you're trying to write. That's the hardest things. Where to start? How do I get them there? And maybe you don't. If you can't think of anything, you just start with the middle or the end. You want to ultimately face this crypt thing at the end of this dungeon. So at least get that down. Use your time, and a lot of times as you begin to develop the story and as you begin to create your adventure, you get inspired then to okay, well, who is this crypt thing? Why is he there? Who are his servants and so on, and you can work backwards from there. So just start doing it. Schedule time and just start doing it. That's my best advice in terms of time management. I guess is your question. But yeah, you know. Another good question I had was, what is your favorite game session ever, and why was it so memorable? And I've actually talked about this before. So it's in a previous video where a party member, the party spent 3 or 4 years of sessions, actual 3 or 4 years trying to stop this soul of Orcus, or the essence of Orcus that was trapped in this prison, stop that from falling into the wrong hands. And a party member, after so many party members had died, finally just handed it over to a devil. So you can go back and see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what makes a session memorable, and I think that is when a DM has laid out a story and the players take it and run with it to the point where the DM is doing 10% of the talking, and the interaction between the players is what makes it amazing. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be something huge. For example, I mentioned in the past we have the rule about role playing, where if you're in your seat, whatever you say, your character actually says. It kind of keeps players in character. So if you want to say something out of character, you simply stand and you can say something out of character. So when players forget these little nuances, it can make for some really great moments. Like I had a group that was running, and it was, I think, that very same campaign. They were going through these borderlands, these badlands, and an enormous orc warband was traveling nearby. And they're in this savanna, so it's tall grass and some scrub, and rather than be stealthy, with a fighter of their group just yells, "Everybody hide!" And he yelled it at the table in his seat, at the top of his lungs. And I go, "Oh, you just alerted the warband." And so suddenly they had like hundreds of orcs descending down on them. Now they were a fairly hefty party. I think they were like 7th or 8th level, so they had fireballs and all manner of AoEs. But there were enough orcs, there were hundreds of them, that it made for a very interesting encounter where they were falling back and basically trying to outmaneuver them, the orcs. They weren't on horseback, they were on foot. Outmaneuver the orcs and do enough damage to the orcs to break their morale and send them fleeing. So it was a lot of fun, and the party, to this day, every once in a while, someone just out of the blue yells, "Everybody hide!" So it's little things like that. So, but what makes a memorable session, I think, is when your players are so invested in the moments and the story that it become that they just run with it. That the DM doesn't have to do. It's just like melting butter. It's just so delicious, and it just flows so naturally. It's a great feeling when the players become that invested in a game. So yeah, you know. So the next question, is, there's a lot of questions here. So they are asking about the balance between using modules and custom prep, and how much I do, and what I think is a good balance, and what kind of prep is useful and what should be left off. But this is a really long question. Maybe I'll break it up into a few. So let's just talk a second about using pre-written modules. And so the Isle of Dread, for example. So it's funny that we talk about using modules, because I am about to run my piracy campaign to its climax at the Isle of Dread. If this was just kind of sitting there. And I use a lot of pre-printed modules, but never as they're written. Almost never. I like to change things up quite a bit. And really, a lot of my players, they've been playing a long time too, so they're well aware of of the content of these modules. So you almost have to rewrite them. Now, if you have a group of new people, you can run your story and adapt the module to your story, no problem. And you can, and most modules, like if you're running the Village of Hamlet, for example, Lareth, the villain at the end of the module of the Village of Hamlet, he's an agent of Loth, and they want to get in on the rise of the Temple of Elemental Evil, which follows Hamlet. And there's no reason why you can't adapt Lareth to be a servant of your villain or your bad guy, and have the goings on at the moat house be part of whatever your storyline is running. So you could save enormous amounts of time by using pre-written modules, and so many of them are available online on PDFs now, fairly cheap. So yeah, I love using these old modules, partly because it does save me a lot of time. Most people don't have the time to run a weekly game, or in my case, I was before the COVID, I was running 2 weekly games, and most people don't have the time to write out everything that they need to write out. So by using the pre-written modules, you can adapt NPCs who already have backstories. You can use towns, dungeons, islands, and just adapt them to your story. And I love it. That's something that that could save you an enormous amount of time and still give your players a very rich and fun experience. So yeah, I'll do the rest. You have a number of other questions wrapped up in here, so we'll continue with that one next time. I think that it all kind of comes back to customizations, so maybe we'll talk more about that next time. But in the meantime, I'm gonna sign off. I do have The Prison of Kos is out now. It's on Amazon in paperback, and it's on DriveThruRPG in PDF. Now, eventually, the DriveThruRPG will have both the paperback and the PDF, but I got to adapt the print files for DriveThruRPG's print specifications. They're different than Amazon, so it's going to take me a little bit more time. It'll be nice to have a kind of a one-stop shop for print and PDF. But also the Evil Under Chlorhaven, which is another one of my adventures, is available on paperback on Amazon again, and then PDF on DriveThruRPG. And I'm slowly getting to the point where we're putting a lot of stuff on DriveThruRPG. So the Monsters Lexicon, the monster manual that I did with my dear friend Kelsey, the Arcane Librarian, the Arcane Library, that is in PDF on DriveThruRPG, and in paperback and hardcover on Amazon. So I love that. I love the monsters we created. So if you've never checked out the Monsters Lexicon, I hope you give it a chance, because it's amazing. And we did a lot of work into it, and I absolutely love it. So again, if you have any questions, just post them below in the comments. I'll add them to the list. Right now, like I said, we've got like 70, 80, 90 questions, and I'm going to go through and try to do as many as I can. Some of them are redundant, so we don't necessarily have that many, but in the meantime, I hope you guys subscribe and hit the little bell and all that good stuff. But happy gaming, and as always, be heroic. Take care, everybody.